All right. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of this week's Open Source Office Hours. And we'll start it off as usual with some announcements. So Nate, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So it's kind of a small thing, but actually really useful. Rachel, one of our engineers, added a couple options for Racer where you can basically log out all of the mutations you're about to perform on remote docs. So in other words, things that are in ShareJS. And then also a debugging option where you can basically disable ShareJS from actually doing anything to modify data. Which is handy if you want to, write a script and test what you're about to do before you actually do it. So we wrote it so that we could do some debugging of our migrations before we actually run them. But you could even use it in the browser. So you can pass it in as an option when you create a model, or you can modify it once the model's already created. So if you just want to do it in your console, you can do it. But basically, if you set on the root model debug.disable submit, it will turn off any mutations of documents in ShareJS. It just basically does a no-op. And then if you set debug.remote mutations, then it will log out the things that it's going to set. So you turn them both on and log out what it would do and not do it, or you could just log out what you're modifying, which could be handy if you're trying to understand what's actually going on under the
hood. Is this what you mean? I'm putting in the chat. Sorry, if you had some model somewhere.
I'm trying to find the right window. Model.root.debug.disable mutations. Yeah, so that's the one that turns off modifications, and then the other one is same, but not disable. No, it's not disable mutations. It's you combine them. It's disable submit, and the other one is remote mutations. True is.
Oh, okay, got it. All right, I'm adding those to the hackpad then. So cool.
That's the logging one. And then disable submit. Literally just basically turns off ShareJS mutations.
And if you do that on the client, if you would then you set that and then you do model.set x to 5, x won't change.
Correct.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, definitely will be useful. And I know, Pavel, you said that Arthur had been doing some work on the rendering thing, and we talked about this, I think, in the previous office hours. You guys wanted a strategy to keep a set of components around as you're going to different pages or re-rendering pages. You wanted to not re-render a part of the page, and so he came up with some kind of solution. What's the deal?
Yes, so there is a package called DerbyHeader that we posted recently. And what it does, so it changes it changes the default templates that are there that Derby creates. It changes so that you have a body. Inside of the body, you have two divs with ID header and ID body, and those in the actual rendering is happening inside into the div with ID body. And each time it renders, it doesn't touch the header div. And all the components in the header, they're kept the same, and it doesn't destroy them. And but the only downside right now is that we don't automatically switch you into another modal context. You have to when you want to subscribe to something, you need to subscribe in the create of this component that you are going to use globally. And you will have to first switch to the to some other context with model.context, like global, for example. And in this way, when the next page is going to render, it is going to keep all of those subscriptions of yours for the global component. Otherwise, it's ready to be used by everyone, I think. It's pretty generic right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a way to do it. One only like problem potentially is like with this is that you're not like doing a full page render, so we're not like aggressively cleaning things up. But as we talked about last time, I think it's probably still okay because
we're cleaning everything.
Metal cleanup works pretty well now.
We're actually cleaning everything. So the default cleaning is there. It's just we overridden like the component creation so that it adds the components into the dollar global components rather than into the dollar components.
Oh, I see. But
So
are you destroying if you're destroying the event model, which is what Derby would normally do, that would...
Yes, event model. So event model is also handled well. So I think yes, like one thing that there was problem with is the event model, but then like Arthur digged into how the event model works, and well, at least he told me that it's working fine. So it should be.
Okay.
I think it should be all there.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. All right. Well, if we don't have any more announcements, we can jump into some questions. So let's jump into questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will introduce my questions.
Yeah.
First one is, well, the first two, they are about the live update of data. So the first case is I'm doing, let's see, well, I don't remember. I'm reading. Oh yeah, it's about modifying the data underlying a projection. So what I was doing was, for example, with the Derby login module, where you have the outs collection, which is then projected in a user's collection, where you don't have the hashes of the passwords and whatever. On the user page, I was listing all the users through the user's projection.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the back end, I was updating the out original collection through the create user function. And basically, it just does a model.add. So I was modifying the original collection of a projection, okay. But then in the view where I was using a ref to the projection, the ref was not updating. Okay. So my question is, am I doing something wrong, or it is supposed to do like that?
Kind of hard to tell if you're doing something wrong, but I don't hear anything that's wrong.
You are subscribed to the.
Without looking at the code, it's a little hard to know whether.
Yeah, well,
but
I may share you my screen, but I didn't want to jump you in my code, so.
No, sure. I mean, what would be helpful is to create a minimal case of this in just another example. so that we could make a unit test from it, or we could, debug it. So what would be helpful is a very simple project that just does the minimum amount so that we could see what's going on.
Yeah.
I think just a note on that too. You can use the generator Derby thing, the UM1 thing, to quickly generate a plain project. And I've been meaning to and haven't gotten around to making a very even simpler template that doesn't include any, that includes as little as possible, as little directory structure as possible for exactly this kind of thing, right? Where you're just like, I just want to make a really quick thing that just shows this one, usage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to be sure, like the simplest thing, you're doing a model.subscribe, not a fetch to your users, right? To your projection.
Yeah. So basically, I'm using Derby router modules. So I'm defining a module of a route which has a load setup. So in the load, I do a model query, and I add a subscription, and then in the setup function, I do the ref of that subscribed model. And then in the view, I just pass this ref as a _page.users to my component view.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fine. It very possibly is just a bug with projections. But like I said, it's a little hard to know for sure, but just your description. So if we can have a minimal test case we could look at, we'll debug it. But, it sounds like it's a bug, but it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay. So, and a similar case, but yet with live updating data. In this case, I have a filter with the sort, which doesn't update if I update the data in the collection, which is filtering. So basically, in a component, okay, I have a pagination component, which allows me to see like the top 10 records in a collection. And if I add records to this collection, the filter doesn't update. While if I refresh the page, then the filter is updated and the new data is shown. So,
how are you making a ref off of the filter, or?
Yeah, I should double check this, but yeah, I should double check because it's code of my colleague, so he just asked me to ask this question, and
sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you do a get and a set, then it's not going to update.
Yeah, of course.
The value of the ref or the filter. That should work.
Okay.
To be honest, but I don't know. I mean, once again, in both of these cases, like, they sound fine, but it's kind of hard to tell without looking at like a simplified example of the code. And it could just be.
Of course. Well, I will dig more in the code, also in the code of the colleague. But if, yeah, we are doing a ref. We are doing a ref.
Are you doing a projection on this one as well, or not?
No, it's just a filter on a collection.
And then you're adding a record to that same collection.
Yeah, actually, in this particular case, maybe there is, because I'm adding a record to this collection through another program, which uses Derby to connect to Redis and update the same collection. So basically, we are having two.
Same Redis?
What?
Both clients, both servers have to be connected to the same Redis.
Yeah, they are. So basically, we have the web interface and the, let's call it, backend. And the backend is connecting to the Redis and MongoDB of the web interface through the Derby store. And I don't know if this might be a corner case.
I mean, I don't know. This should work. Like,
yeah,
there's definitely little small things that I'm still working through with binding issues, but this is a pretty basic one. So I believe that
I also thought so. So it might be a bug in our code, but my question was where to understand if this behavior was supposed to be like this or not. Since it's not supposed to be like this, then we will dig more in our code, and if there's nothing in our code, might be a bug in Derby or Racer.
Well, so the general debugging strategy is you should start with understanding if the data is correct before you worry about what you're seeing on the screen, because the fundamental way that Derby works is that data is synced via ShareJS. ShareJS emits events that cause Racer to do stuff. Racer emits events that causes Derby to do stuff, and then Derby updates the page. So, you basically want to kind of reduce the number of variables by going as close to the source as possible. So whenever you're like, this is weird, I think this thing should be updated, the first thing you should do is check to see if the data is what you expect it to be, but the view isn't. So if there's an inconsistency between the data and the view. If there's an inconsistency between the data and the view, it might be because the data is being updated in a way where the events aren't being emitted correctly, which might happen because you're you're modifying an object without doing it through the Racer method, or there's a few ways where that can happen. So then the next thing you want to do is if the data is what you expect it to be, you log out the events on the model. So you can just use, if you added Derby debug, you can use model.log events, and it'll just log everything. It's just basically a shorthand for console logging all of the events with a simple event listener. And then if you're seeing the events and they look like the right events, but the view's not updating, that's probably a bug in Derby where it's the bindings are messed up. There's still a few issues with bindings, but they're mostly only dealing with for the most part, components that are in lists. If you don't have a bunch of components in lists, then it should be fine.
Okay.
But that's definitely currently still a thing that I'm working on. We're going to have to rewrite that code, frankly. And other than that, I'm not aware of any glaring binding bugs anymore that are particularly common, other than the components and list one. So basically, that's the sequence you want to go through. It's is the data even there? If the data is there, are the right events being emitted? If the right events are being emitted, is the view being updated according to the events, is sort of the sequence I go through. If the data isn't right, you can kind of track that through too, right? So in this case, a new object is being added. So the first thing you should see is the object being added to the collection? So if you look at the model, is it in random collection.id where you expect it to be? If it's not, well, then you've got a problem with your subscription. If it is collection, but it's not in the filter results, then that's the problem, right? So you should just basically track down the sequence in the order that these things happen. So it starts with the object gets subscribed, the object gets put in the browser, that causes the filter to retrigger, the filter reruns, it updates the output, that causes an event which causes Derby to update the UI, and then Derby updates the UI, and you see it. So you just basically go in that order and see if each of those things is happening.
Yeah, of course. At this point, in our case, it seems more because if we refresh the page then we see everything correctly. So,
sure. Well, I'm not talking
data,
about the data in the database. I'm talking, like, that's step one, sure, is the data being stored in the database. But I'm talking about the data in the local model.
Oh, data in the model. Okay.
Everything I talked about does not deal with a page refresh. You should check to see if the data is being updated in real time. Then you should check to see if the data is being updated in the filter results in real time. You should check to see if the filter results are emitting the right events. Then you should check to see if the events are updating the UI, because that's actually how Derby works, right? So if you want to debug code, the best thing to do is to just literally step through it like the way that the code works. It's like all very imperative. Like each of these things follows from the other in a very, very straightforward manner.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And last thing was, yeah, it was just like a feature request for the Derby router module. So I guess that Pavel is the right person here. In that, most of the time I don't need to add a subscription. I just need to add a fetch. And well, I just ended up adding a subscription because, well, it just worked. But my question was maybe like using a fetch is less heavy and it just does what I need without the subscription overload. So my question was, would it be possible to add an add fetch method to Derby router? I digged into the code a little bit, but not so much. It was not so immediate for me to do a PR. So here I am.
Yeah, it's very easy to do.
Okay.
It's just that, like, first, when you write your module that you're going to subscribe for, well, that you're going to use after that, down the road when you're handling some route, like you usually, like it's more of a, like when you do the custom code, you first subscribe for modules. I think there is a function that is called subscribe modules, and in this case it's going to be confusing because we are no longer just subscribing for it. We're also doing the fetch. So maybe we'll need to come up with some better name for it instead of subscribe modules. Maybe something else.
Okay. Well, so I'm actually thinking about adding a racer method called load. And the reason why is that sometimes you want to do subscribes and fetches in parallel. So what I currently do myself is I just use async.parallel. But it's pretty often that I've found this pattern being useful. So it's just like a lot of boilerplate that I keep writing over and over again. So like the method, the event name in Racer is called load, and when something's removed it's called unload because it's sort of like broader than subscribe and fetch. So I think like load would be the generic word I would use if you want.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so we can use this word.
Cool.
All right.
Problem solved.
Great. So yeah, Matteo will do it. Well, I'll ask Arthur because he is working on this module.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Cool. Any remaining questions anybody have?
Well, I had another one, but then it was already replied in Gitter.
Did the answer make sense to you?
Well, I didn't really. Yeah, it makes sense, but maybe I don't know how to use what you said. In the sense that basically model.query and model.add, as I use them, they are the same, right?
Right,
Basically.
because you're essentially fetching. Let me see if I can. We can try copying this into the notes, but it's in Getter. You basically did a model.query on a collection with an no filtering, so it's just querying the whole collection. Then you did collection, then you fetched on that query. The other thing you did was make a model.at of that collection and then fetched on that reference. And yeah, those are essentially the same thing, because if you can fetch a path, and if the path is just the collection, you're just fetching everything in that collection, and it puts it into the collection in the model. Whereas if you query, and if you were to query a subset of a collection, right, then if you did the query.get, you would see the documents returned. But if you did model.at collection, you would see the same thing. Like you would get the object format of the documents that you fetched. Yeah. So you essentially end up with a reference to the same data. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so references from queries make arrays, and references from collections make objects. That's just how it works.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Now I know. And also because I tried to do a console log, and I saw the difference between the two. My question at this point is then how, for example, to iterate through the results of model.add. So, for example, if I want to use each in the Derby view, Derby view, how to
make it into an array.
Excuse me?
You have to make it into an array. Each cannot iterate through an object, and I don't have any plan to make it iterate through an object.
Yeah, okay. So basically, I need to first, I would just need to do like a collection.get after the model.add, and so that I get the array. But at this point, then it's just it's just simpler to use a query. And
you can also use a filter, which is just a one-line thing to turn the object into an array, and then you don't have to do it in JavaScript, right? Like, because when you create a filter, you give it a reference, a place to put the results of the filter. So then at that path, you'll have an array that you can then each over.
Sure.
Filter is just literally a thing that takes a collection and creates an array.
Okay, and so looking at between using filter and query, which is the less heavier?
Well, they just do different things. So the way the collection query works under the hood currently is collection queries actually, if you do what you did in those two examples, it'll actually translate your fetch of the collection into a Mongo query anyway, so it ends up being the same thing, because Mongo doesn't let you, there's no command to get collections more efficiently than that. So it's the same thing at the Mongo layer. At the pub/sub layer, in theory, it could be more efficient to just subscribe to all the collection or something like that, though it hasn't actually been implemented, so that doesn't really matter yet. So basically, it doesn't matter. The difference is that when you use a query, what has to happen is that the server if you're subscribing, there's a difference, because the server has to notice the change, push the change to your client, and then your client responds to it, because the query is driving the reference. So the query has to go all the way to the server has to notice the change, and then your client can render the new stuff. Whereas a filter is driven on the client side only. So the filter notices that there's documents that were created either locally or on the server. So if you are writing a chat app, you don't want to wait until the server finds out about a message and then tells the client that that message now matches the query, you want to just immediately show the chat message when somebody hits enter. Right?
Yeah.
So it basically has to do with latency of like perceived latency for the user that's making changes. You're usually better off doing these things in the client because usually you're responding to stuff that the user can modify. But if like it's basically read-only in the app or it's not real-time, then it doesn't really matter, and it's okay to drive it from the server query. In short, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally.
I'm actually planning on making another module at some point, though I haven't done it yet, where like basically you can take a query and turn it into a filter function that's equivalent to that query, and like adding another method to queries that like create a filter. Because filters are just JavaScript functions that basically do queries in the client, if that makes sense.
Okay.
You're just doing it client side instead of asking Mongo to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Any last questions?
Andrew was asking about the racer examples in the chat. I think he's got them running, but I was asking for sort of a basic overview of showing that. What I think I'll do is record a couple of really short videos, just screencasting, walking through, running the examples, and pointing out what's happening. I think that kind of thing can get people to tinkering in a few minutes. I've done that actually for some of the Derby examples. I just never watched them to make sure they are good enough to share. So I think I'll do that maybe even this afternoon or evening, because they're also like 5 to 10 minutes each. And if they are, I'll just upload them to my YouTube, and we can do higher quality educational videos for the Derby site later. But this should at least get some people going.
Cool.
Did you open the door for sharing the Derby low quality videos privately?
Yeah, no, I can definitely share them privately.
Awesome.
I have them on Dropbox, but I'm, as long as they don't say something wrong, then I'll try to just upload them to YouTube, and if they help someone, they help someone.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well, then I think we'll wrap it up, and thanks for the well-organized question asking. It was really helpful, and as this week progresses, I'll try to collect stuff in the notes for next week so that we can just kind of burn through what's going on.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.